Once you know what your content needs to cover and how it will be structured, you can start looking at the details. For that, you need to think about the way you're going to represent your information. No matter what your content is intended for, sales or training, face-to-face or e-learning, your aim is to communicate effectively. You can break this down into 3 things you're encouraging your audience to do. Engage with the content, understand your message, and remember its significance. One of the problems with the majority of content written for training or sales is that it relies too much on text. Part of this probably comes from the fact that it's easy. Everyone is pushed for time, so shortcuts are always appreciated. But part of it is also that we tend to think, best tell them everything just in case. So you cram everything you've got into your resource without thinking too much about it. But this just-in-case approach isn't usually the best way to tackle learning. And even when it is, whilst text might be an efficient way to deliver all of your content to your audience, it's not an effective way to help them engage with it, understand it, or remember it. The roots of visuals as a means of communication go back millennia. You can see examples of cave paintings dating back 40,000 years, not used solely for decoration, but also to tell stories, to pass on meaning. The ancient Egyptians mastered the art with their pictorial hieroglyphs, from which they built a complex and nuanced method of recording and sharing information. The ancient Chinese too fully understood the value of linking visuals to meaning, and many of their characters are graphical illustrations of the meaning they convey, like door, fire, and tree. A sort of shorthand that relies on common understanding to convey complex, sophisticated ideas in a beautiful and elegant way. Fast forward to today and look at the strings of emoji that people use to chat. Yes, viewed on an OLED screen and input via capacitive touch, but the same basic idea of visual representation of a message. A quicker, more intuitive, and somehow more human way of communicating. The problem with text in a presentation is that audiences are compelled to read it. They can do this much more quickly than a presenter can speak, so quickly tune out the presenter altogether and move on to thinking about other things. One study, done by Christoph Wecker in 2012, shed some light onto why this might be the case. In this experiment, 2 audiences were presented to, one with text-based slides, one with none at all. Surprisingly, the audience retained more information from the presenter without any slides. Why? Well, the audience was assuming that things written on the slide were more significant than what the presenter was saying. And because the audience couldn't listen and read at the same time, they were making a decision about which to engage with. They chose what they perceived to be more important of the two, the slides, to the detriment of the presenter. But you could overcome this phenomenon by removing the text from the slide and replacing it with sparse text, graphics, and visuals, effectively splitting the message between the narration and the slides. Doing so means the audience engages with both at once, which helps them to understand and remember the content, making the presentation far more effective. Now, you've probably heard some of the extensive theory discussing different learning styles: visual learners, auditory learners, kinesthetic learners, although there's been just about as much written dismissing the ideas. If you subscribe to them though, how does this visual approach fit into that? Well, for our part, we feel a blended approach to presentations is best. A blend of content, styles, interactive slides, demos, exercises, video, questions and visuals will all keep your audience engaged to ensure they understand and help them remember. Now, all of that seems fine, and it's all well and good to say you should banish text, or at least significantly reduce it, in the content that you're creating. But how do you actually go about doing it? You can check out loads of practical PowerPoint techniques at BrightCarbon.com, but right now, let's focus on the preliminary stages. How do you turn your text into visuals? Or more specifically, how do you start thinking about your message visually? The truth is that just about anything you can set your mind to is possible when you're creating visual slides. But the crazy animated storytelling you're seeing today obviously takes a lot of time and practice. A good first step is to think about small changes and decisions you can make straight away to help you communicate more effectively. Key to this is learning about the language of visuals. You need to understand what the decisions you've made unconsciously about a slide are actually saying to your audience, and how you can design things more consciously to support and enhance their meaning. Take a look at these 5 circles. These might be 5 bits of important information represented as 5 icons or illustrations. One obvious way to arrange them would be to line them up horizontally, like so. This is a pretty obvious approach to take, and many of you, I imagine, would see it as a natural or obvious choice. But what is that decision actually saying about the information? What is that layout communicating that perhaps you didn't really intend? Firstly, it's saying that each point is separate and discrete, not necessarily connected because they're not touching. Each point has equal visual weighting. They're the same size, so they're perceived to carry the same level of importance. Finally, they suggest a chronology, or at least a logical flow for the information, as we naturally read from left to right. There's a lot going on here, even if you didn't intend or even realize it. So let's play around with this a bit. If you arrange the point in a circle, you can give the impression that this is a finite group. There's no more room for another point, so the audience assumes that what you're showing them is complete. If you link these together through the center, it suggests that each is related to a single unifying concept or category. But if the link changes to a ring, this connection means something different. They're related to each other, but not necessarily a central idea. Again, a logical flow is suggested here too. You can suggest a close relationship between points by having the circles expand and come into contact with each other, or take this even further and have them intersect. If you choose to do this, do so for a reason. The interconnected areas need to mean something, a specific piece of information that means something exclusively to the two adjacent points. Let's put these back into a line. From here, you can indicate significance in a number of ways. Moving one out of line draws attention to it above the others. Similarly, making it bigger indicates it's more important. You can extend this out and suggest an entire hierarchy through the relative size of each circle. The biggest takes up the most space and is therefore the most significant. At this stage, the order is less important, and keeping them lined up is perhaps even a little counterintuitive, so spreading them out more makes sense. Finally, you don't need to limit yourself to a single 2D plane. One very powerful way to suggest significance or emphasis is to use focus. So if you make some of the circles look blurry, your eye is drawn immediately to the sharp elements on the slide, and less to those that you've obscured. This gives the effect that they are receding into the background further away from you and therefore less important. As you can see, there are lots of interesting ways to communicate ideas, even with subtle visual treatments. But really effective visuals don't just look slick. The key thing is to use these approaches to communicate a relevant story to your audience. Let the visuals do some of the heavy lifting of the storytelling for the audience, so that they understand the concepts, complexities, and ideas that you're conveying. And, ideally, help give your audience a sense of what they will be able to achieve as a result.